At a quiet gas station on the outskirts of Silver Creek, a group of rowdy bikers revved their engines, their laughter echoing through the night. Among them stood Elijah Mercer, a well-dressed black CEO refueling his sleek sports car. One careless bump, a spilled drink, and heated words set off a chain of events no one could foresee. What began as a tense confrontation spiraled into a harrowing journey that tested courage, shattered prejudices, and unveiled secrets buried deep in the town's shadows. Elijah Mercer was a man of precision. A self-made CEO of a technology firm, he wasn't used to chaotic moments like this. Pulling up to the dimly lit gas station on the outskirts of Silver Creek, he was preoccupied with the buzz of a successful day. His phone chimed with congratulatory messages, but tonight he just wanted to refuel and reach the cabin he rented for a rare weekend of solitude. The gas station was oddly quiet, with only the sound of crickets and the faint hum of a flickering bulb above the pumps. Elijah stepped out of his sleek Porsche, inhaling the cool night air. Far from corporate boardrooms, the stillness was a welcome change. But as he began refueling, the low rumble of motorcycles shattered the calm. 5 bikers roared in, their engines cutting through the night like jagged blades. Their leader, a burly man with a shaved head and tattoos snaking up his arms, dismounted first. His leather vest, emblazoned with the name Roy, marked him as the president of the Iron Fangs, a gang known in whispers for their rough reputation. The others followed, their laughter echoing through the lot. Elijah glanced at them briefly, instincts warning him to stay disengaged. He focused on his car, scrolling through emails while the gas pump hummed. But trouble had a way of finding him. "Nice car you got there, Mr. Fancy Suit," Roy called, his voice loud enough to demand attention. Elijah didn't respond. Roy sauntered closer, boots crunching against the gravel. "I'm talking to you." Elijah sighed, locking his phone. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone calm but firm. Roy smirked. "Don't see too many suits around here. You lost?" "No," Elijah replied curtly. "Just passing through." Roy's expression darkened. "This is Iron Fang territory. We don't take kindly to folks who act better than us." "I don't think I'm better than anyone," Elijah said evenly. "Now, if you'll excuse me." Before he could finish, Roy bumped into him, spilling coffee down Elijah's tailored jacket. The rich fabric darkened with the stain, the acrid smell of burnt beans filling the air. Elijah stepped back, jaw tightening as he surveyed the damage. "Oops," Roy said mockingly. "Didn't see you there." The bikers burst into laughter, their jeers loud. Elijah inhaled deeply, resisting the urge to retaliate. Men like Roy thrived on intimidation. But this wasn't his arena. He was outnumbered, far from allies. "Apologize," Elijah said, his voice low but commanding. The laughter stopped abruptly. Roy's smirk faded. "What did you just say?" Roy growled. "I said, apologize," Elijah repeated. "You ruined my jacket. It's the least you can do." Roy stepped closer, his towering frame casting a shadow. "Or what?" Before Elijah could respond, the sound of an approaching engine broke the tension. A police cruiser sped past the gas station, its lights flashing but sirens silent. The brief distraction caused Roy to pause. Elijah held his ground, locking eyes with Roy. He wasn't about to back down. But just as the situation teetered on the edge of violence, thunder rolled through the night. The sky opened up, unleashing a torrential downpour. Roy cursed, motioning for his gang to retreat under the station's awning. "Guess we'll settle this later," he said. Elijah remained by his car, rain soaking through his clothes. As he climbed into the driver's seat, his instincts told him this wasn't over. Lightning illuminated the station, casting eerie shadows. Inside the store, the cashier, a wiry teenager, watched nervously. Suddenly, the power flickered and went out entirely, plunging the station into darkness. The pumps, lights, and neon signs all failed. In the silence that followed, Roy's voice boomed once more. "Still here, huh? Thought you'd be smart enough to leave by now." Elijah opened his car door, umbrella in hand. "I'm waiting for the storm to pass. Is that a problem?" Roy chuckled coldly. "You should know when to quit, friend." The bikers murmured among themselves under the awning. Elijah checked his dashboard camera. He'd been recording since his arrival, and every detail of the encounter was safely captured. Inside the gas station, the teenager ducked behind the counter, stealing glances at the bikers. One of them lit a cigarette, the red glow casting ominous shadows on their faces. Elijah's instincts told him to stay alert. This wasn't just a random encounter, it felt deliberate. The rain pounded harder against the station's awning, each drop amplifying the tension. Roy stood at the edge of the shelter, staring into the rain as if calculating his next move. Elijah's grip on the steering wheel tightened. His every sense was heightened, prepared for whatever came next. Suddenly, one of the bikers gestured toward Elijah's car, whispering something to Roy. A chill ran down Elijah's spine. He wasn't just an outsider to them, he was a target. But Elijah had dealt with predators before. This wasn't his first battle. The storm raged on, cloaking the lot in chaos. Tonight wasn't over. It was just beginning. The rain poured relentlessly, turning the gas station into an eerie silhouette under the darkened sky. Elijah sat in his car, watching the gang through his rearview mirror. His instincts screamed at him to leave, but something about Roy's demeanor held him in place. The tension thickened, as if the storm outside mirrored the brewing storm within the station lot. Lightning illuminated Roy standing under the awning with his gang. Their quiet exchanges hinted at something more. One of them pointed toward Elijah's car, and his stomach tightened. This wasn't random. He could feel it, something more dangerous than the surface bravado of a biker gang. Elijah hesitated but stepped out, umbrella in hand. Rain splattered against the pavement as he approached the awning. The cold air bit through his damp clothes, but he ignored it, his focus locked on Roy. The gang leader noticed him immediately, his lips curling into a sly grin. "Well, look who decided to join us," Roy said mockingly. "Finally growing a backbone?" "I don't want trouble," Elijah replied, his voice steady despite the storm. "But I need to know. What's your problem with me?" The bikers exchanged glances, their laughter cutting through the storm. One, a wiry man with a scar, stepped forward. "Problem? You're just in the wrong place at the wrong time, suit." "Let's make it easy," Elijah said. "I'll get my gas and leave. We don't need to make this harder." Roy's grin widened. "You think it's that simple? You stumbled into something you shouldn't have. Now we gotta figure out what to do with you." Before Elijah could respond, the sound of an approaching vehicle cut through the rain. A black SUV pulled into the lot, headlights piercing the haze. Two men in dark suits stepped out, their presence shifting the tension from uneasy to outright volatile. One biker muttered, "Who the hell are they?" The taller man stepped forward, his voice cold. "You've been holding out on us, Roy. Where's the shipment?" Roy's face hardened, his usual smirk replaced by a guarded expression. "I don't know what you're talking about." The man chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Don't play dumb. Hand it over, or we'll make an example out of you." Elijah's mind raced. Shipment? What shipment? He discreetly started recording on his phone, sensing danger in every word exchanged. Roy whispered to one of his men, who nodded and disappeared around the corner. Moments later, the biker returned with a metal briefcase. Roy hesitated before handing it over, his hands trembling. The tall man opened it, revealing stacks of cash and packages wrapped in plastic. Drugs. Elijah's chest tightened. "Smart choice," the man said, snapping the briefcase shut. "But there's still a problem." He gestured to Elijah. "Him." All eyes turned to Elijah. The second man raised his gun, pointing it directly at him. "We can't have witnesses." Elijah forced himself to stay calm, even as his pulse raced. I'm not a threat. I don't even know what's going on here." The taller man tilted his head, studying him like a predator sizing up its prey. "Doesn't matter. You saw too much." To Elijah's surprise, Roy stepped in. "Leave him out of this," he said firmly. "He's not part of it." The gunman scoffed. "Since when do you care about collateral damage?" Roy's voice hardened. "Take him out, and it'll bring heat we don't need. He's not worth it." The taller man sighed, motioning for his partner to lower the weapon. "Fine, but if he talks, it's on you." As the SUV drove off, silence enveloped the gas station. Elijah felt Roy's eyes on him. "You've got no idea what you've just walked into," Roy muttered. Elijah didn't respond. Climbing into his car, his trembling hands gripped the steering wheel. His phone was still recording, the screen glowing faintly in the darkness. Drugs, blackmail, armed threats. It was a storm bigger than expected. Inside, the teenage cashier cautiously peeked out from behind the counter. The kid had clearly been watching the entire scene unfold, but he quickly ducked out of sight when Roy turned toward the store. Elijah noticed the movement, filing it away in his memory. Roy lit a cigarette, his hands shaky as he exhaled smoke into the humid air. His crew murmured among themselves, their earlier bravado replaced by quiet unease. It was clear they hadn't anticipated the arrival of the two suited men. Elijah debated his next move. He could leave now, pretend none of this had happened, but he knew the truth was far more complicated. Whatever was in that briefcase wasn't just dangerous. It was a small piece of a much larger puzzle, and now he was a part of it, whether he liked it or not. The storm raged on, lightning striking in the distance. Elijah glanced at his gas gauge. Stepping back out to refuel felt risky. For now, he stayed in the car, his gaze locked on Roy and his gang as they argued in hushed voices. "Suit," Roy finally called out, his voice cutting through the rain. "You better get out of here while you still can." Elijah rolled his window down slightly. "What makes you think I'm not already gone?" Roy smirked but didn't answer. He flicked his cigarette into a puddle, watching it sizzle out. "If you're smart, you'll disappear and forget everything. But something tells me you're not that kind of guy." Elijah didn't respond, rolling the window back up. His heart pounded, adrenaline surging through his veins. Roy was right. He wasn't the kind of person to walk away, not when the truth was so close. The rain began to let up, the storm settling into a steady drizzle. The gas station lights flickered back on, their brightness jarring against the darkness of the night. Elijah started his engine, ready to leave, but as he pulled away, he glanced in his rearview mirror one last time. Roy was still watching, his expression unreadable. Elijah tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Tonight wasn't over, not by a long shot. Elijah's car sped through the rain-soaked highway, his thoughts racing faster than the vehicle itself. The events at the gas station replayed in his mind. Roy's cryptic warnings, the men in suits, and the ominous briefcase of cash and drugs. Every detail felt like a piece of a dangerous puzzle, one that had pulled him in without his consent. He gripped the steering wheel tightly. This wasn't just a bad encounter. It was something much bigger. His GPS guided him toward the cabin he had rented, tucked away in the woods miles outside of Silver Creek. What had promised solitude now felt like isolation in the worst way. The rain eased into a steady drizzle, but the tension in Elijah's chest didn't lessen. His eyes darted to the rearview mirror repeatedly, his instincts whispering that someone was following him. Yet the highway remained empty. Finally, the cabin came into view, its small porch light glowing faintly in the mist. Elijah parked and quickly grabbed his bags, his eyes scanning the dense trees surrounding the property. Every rustling branch, every shifting shadow made his pulse quicken. He locked the door behind him and let out a shaky breath, setting his phone on the table. The footage he had recorded at the gas station was his lifeline now. He hit play. The video was clear. Roy's argument with the suited men, the briefcase exchange, the threats. Elijah paused, focusing on the taller man's face. He squinted at the screen, certain he had seen the man before, though he couldn't place him. Frustration gnawed at him. Opening his laptop, Elijah searched for clues, typing Silver Creek drug activity into a search engine. An article popped up detailing a sharp increase in fentanyl-related overdoses in nearby counties. It mentioned a suspected criminal syndicate responsible for trafficking the drug, though law enforcement had no solid leads. Elijah's gut churned. Was Roy involved in this? And what about the men in suits? Were they part of the syndicate or rivals? Before Elijah could think further, the rumble of an engine outside broke his concentration. He froze. He hadn't passed any other vehicles on the road to the cabin, and no one knew he was here. Moving cautiously to the window, he pulled the curtain back a fraction. A dark SUV sat idling at the edge of the driveway, its headlights cutting through the drizzle. His heart pounded. They had found him. Elijah grabbed his phone and dialed 911. The call connected, but just as he began explaining his situation, the line went dead. He stared at the phone in disbelief. No service. Panic bubbled in his chest, but he forced himself to think. He was on his own. The SUV's engine roared as it crept closer. Elijah quickly turned off the cabin lights and grabbed the heaviest thing within reach, a flashlight. The cabin wasn't defensible, but the surrounding woods offered a chance to escape. He slipped out the back door, moving as quietly as possible into the dense trees. The rain muffled his footsteps, but it also limited his vision. Each branch seemed to snag at him, slowing his progress. Voices carried from the cabin. They were inside. Elijah crouched low behind the underbrush as two figures stepped onto the porch, their flashlights slicing through the darkness. "Spread out," one of them ordered. Elijah's pulse quickened. He couldn't outrun them, but he could outthink them. He circled back toward the driveway, his goal set on his car, but as he neared it, he spotted a third figure standing guard. Elijah cursed silently. They had anticipated this. His foot slipped on the wet ground, and the noise drew their attention. Flashlights swung toward him, their beams cutting through the rain. Elijah bolted, running deeper into the woods. Shouts followed him, and the lights closed in. He zigzagged through the trees, his lungs burning with every breath, his legs screaming for relief. Just when he thought he couldn't go on, he spotted a small creek cutting through the forest. Without hesitation, Elijah plunged into the icy water, letting the current pull him downstream. The voices faded, and the flashlights disappeared. Crawling onto the opposite bank, he shivered uncontrollably. He was soaked, exhausted, but alive. He couldn't go back to the cabin. That much was clear. He needed answers, and there was only one person who could provide them: Roy. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Elijah stumbled out of the woods near a deserted gas station. His legs felt like lead as he leaned against a pump for support. The cashier inside looked up, startled as Elijah stumbled through the door. "Help!" Elijah croaked, his voice barely audible. "I need to make a call." The cashier hesitated, then handed him a phone. Elijah dialed a number he hadn't used in years. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Elijah!" "It's me," he said, struggling to keep his voice steady. "I need your help." The line went silent. Then the voice replied, firm and unwavering. "Where are you?" Elijah glanced out the window. He wasn't sure who to trust, but he knew one thing for certain. Whoever was after him wasn't going to stop, and neither was he. The gas station was eerily quiet in the early morning light, the hum of fluorescent lights above the pumps the only sound breaking the stillness. Elijah leaned heavily against the counter inside, his soaked clothes leaving a growing puddle on the floor. His hands trembled as he held the phone, the weight of the night's events settling in like a storm cloud over his chest. "Elijah, talk to me," the voice on the other end of the line urged. It was Marcus, his old friend and a private investigator with a knack for finding the truth. "I'm in trouble," Elijah said, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't even know where to begin. They're after me. Drug traffickers, I think. It's connected to a gang, the Iron Fangs, and some guys in suits. I've got footage, but they know I saw everything." "Slow down," Marcus replied, his tone steady. "Where are you?" "A gas station off Route 45 near the edge of Silver Creek," Elijah answered. He glanced out the window nervously, half expecting to see the dark SUV from the cabin. "I don't think they've found me yet, but it's only a matter of time." Marcus paused. The faint sound of typing filled the silence. "Stay put. Don't move until I call you back. I'll dig into this and figure out what's going on." The line went dead before Elijah could respond. He handed the phone back to the cashier and stepped outside. The cool morning air stung his skin, but it was a welcome contrast to the oppressive fear tightening around him. He scanned the empty parking lot and the surrounding woods. Everything felt too quiet. The low rumble of an approaching vehicle made his stomach flip. He ducked behind one of the pumps, peeking cautiously. It wasn't the SUV. It was an old pickup truck, rusted and worn, with a lone driver. Elijah watched as the man got out and stretched before heading into the convenience store. This was his chance. "Excuse me," Elijah called as the man exited the store. "I need a ride, just a few miles down the road." The man eyed him warily. "You in some kind of trouble?" Elijah hesitated. "I just need to get away from here," he said, pulling out a $100 bill. "Please." The man shrugged and nodded. "All right, hop in." Elijah climbed into the passenger seat, glancing nervously out the window as the truck pulled onto the highway. The driver didn't ask questions, and Elijah didn't offer answers. The faint crackle of a country station on the radio filled the silence. Every passing car made Elijah's heart skip, but the highway remained quiet. 15 minutes later, the truck stopped near a small diner. "This is as far as I go," the driver said. Elijah thanked him, handing over the cash, and stepped out. The diner's neon sign flickered against the dull gray sky. Inside, the warm smell of coffee and bacon filled the air, momentarily easing his nerves. Elijah sat in a booth near the corner and pulled out his phone. A single bar of service. He opened his email. A new message waited at the top of his inbox. The subject line read, "I can help." His breath caught as he opened it. The email contained a single line. "Meet me at the old warehouse on Cedar Street. Come alone." Elijah's gut screamed at him to ignore it. It had to be a trap. But what choice did he have? He was out of options. Paying for his coffee, he stepped back into the cold and mapped the route to Cedar Street on his phone. The warehouse wasn't far, 2 miles at most. He decided to walk. The streets were empty as Elijah approached the warehouse. The building loomed ahead, its shattered windows and graffiti-covered walls exuding menace. A faint glow from inside hinted that it wasn't entirely abandoned. Swallowing his fear, Elijah pushed open the door. The smell of mildew and rust hit him immediately. The dim light made it hard to see much, but the faint hum of electricity was unmistakable. A figure stepped out from the shadows. A tall, lean man with piercing eyes and a leather jacket. "You must be Elijah," the man said, his voice calm but cold. "You've caused quite the stir." "Who are you?" Elijah demanded, masking his fear with defiance. The man smirked. "Let's just say I don't like loose ends." His gaze flicked to Elijah's pocket where the phone rested. "Now, let's talk about that video." The dim light of the warehouse flickered, casting long shadows that danced across the cold, graffiti-covered walls. Elijah stood frozen, his eyes locked on the man in the leather jacket. Everything about this stranger screamed danger, but Elijah had no choice. He tightened his grip on his phone, the weight of the footage within it pressing heavily on his conscience. "Let's start with the obvious," the man said, his voice calm but icy. "What made you think it was a good idea to record that exchange?" Elijah swallowed hard. "I didn't plan for any of this. I stopped at a gas station and your friends decided to drag me into their mess." The man raised an eyebrow, smirking faintly. "My friends?" You think I'm with them?" "If you're not, then who are you?" Elijah demanded, trying to mask the tremor in his voice. "I'm someone who cleans up problems," the man said, stepping closer, "and right now, you're a very big problem." Elijah instinctively stepped back, his heart racing. "I'm not trying to expose anyone. I just want to get out of this alive." "Alive?" The man chuckled darkly. "That depends entirely on you. That video on your phone, it's worth more than your life to the people involved. If they know you still have it, they'll hunt you to the ends of the earth." "I didn't ask for this," Elijah shot back, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "I was in the wrong place at the wrong time." "Wrong place, wrong time," the man echoed mockingly. "Funny how that excuse never seems to matter." He folded his arms, studying Elijah. "But maybe you're not as helpless as you look." "What do you mean?" Elijah asked, his voice wary. The man leaned against a rusted metal pillar, his piercing gaze unwavering. "That video doesn't just incriminate the Iron Fangs. The men in suits, they're connected to something much larger. A syndicate, international, dangerous, and you're holding the only proof anyone's had in years." Elijah's stomach churned. He thought back to the article he'd read about fentanyl overdoses and the mention of an elusive criminal network. So, what happens now? "That depends," the man said, his tone turning serious. "You can hand over the video to me, and I can make sure it gets to the right people. Or—" He paused, letting the weight of the alternative hang in the air. "Or what?" Elijah pressed. "Or you can keep running," the man said bluntly. "But you won't last long. These people have resources, money, manpower, connections. They'll find you, and they won't ask nicely for that phone." Elijah hesitated. He didn't trust this man. How could he? But what other option did he have? His mind raced, weighing the risks. "How do I know you're not just going to use the video for yourself?" The man smirked again. "You don't. But ask yourself this. Do you really have the luxury of being picky right now?" Before Elijah could respond, the faint sound of an engine outside broke the tension. The man's expression darkened instantly. "They're here." "Who?" Elijah whispered, his voice barely audible. The man didn't answer. He grabbed Elijah by the arm and pulled him deeper into the warehouse, weaving through a maze of crates and abandoned machinery. "Stay quiet," he hissed, "and don't do anything stupid." They reached a small room at the back of the warehouse. The man pushed Elijah inside and closed the door behind them. He pulled out a gun from his jacket and checked the chamber, his movements quick and practiced. "What are you doing?" Elijah asked, panic rising in his chest. "Protecting our bargaining chip," the man replied. "You?" The sound of footsteps echoed through the warehouse, accompanied by muffled voices. Elijah pressed himself against the wall, his breath shallow. Through a crack in the door, he caught a glimpse of the intruders. 3 men, all dressed in black, their faces obscured by masks. "They're not here to talk," the man whispered, his grip tightening on the gun. "Stay behind me." The next few minutes passed in tense silence. The intruders moved methodically, their flashlights sweeping the room. Elijah's heart pounded in his chest, each beat louder than the last. He gripped his phone tightly, the weight of the video feeling heavier than ever. Finally, one of the masked men stopped just outside their hiding spot. Elijah held his breath as the door creaked open. The man in the leather jacket moved swiftly, disarming the intruder with a single motion and knocking him unconscious. The other 2 rushed in, but the man was ready. Shots rang out, deafening in the confined space. When the chaos subsided, the man turned to Elijah, his face set in grim determination. "We need to move, now." Elijah nodded, too shaken to argue. They slipped out of the warehouse through a side door, emerging into the pale morning light. The man led Elijah to a parked car, its engine running. "Get in," he ordered. As they sped away from the warehouse, Elijah finally found his voice. "What just happened back there? Who were those guys?" "They work for the syndicate," the man said, his eyes fixed on the road. And that was just the first wave. They'll keep coming until they get what they want. Elijah swallowed hard. So, what do we do now? The man glanced at him briefly, his expression unreadable. We play the game, but if you want to survive, you're going to have to trust me. Elijah didn't respond. He stared out the window, the landscape blurring as they drove. Trust? It was a luxury he couldn't afford, but for now, he had no choice. The black sedan careened through the empty streets, its tires screeching as the man in the leather jacket navigated sharp turns with practiced precision. Elijah clung to the armrest, his heart pounding as he glanced behind them. The distant headlights of another car loomed closer, the hunters relentless in their pursuit. "Who are these people?" Elijah demanded, his voice shaking. "They're part of the syndicate," the man replied without looking at him. "They don't ask questions, they eliminate threats, and right now, that's you." Elijah's fingers gripped his phone tightly. The video. It all came back to the video. "Why didn't you tell me we'd be running like this? I thought you said you could help." The man spared him a glance. "I am helping, by keeping you alive." A sharp jolt threw Elijah forward as their car slammed into a pothole. The man cursed under his breath but didn't slow down. The pursuing car closed the gap, its headlights flashing ominously. "We're not going to make it like this," Elijah shouted. "Then buckle up," the man said sharply. He slammed on the brakes, spinning the wheel hard to the right. The sedan skidded sideways, narrowly avoiding a collision with a lamppost, and darted into a narrow alleyway. The pursuing car overshot the turn, giving them a few precious seconds to breathe. Elijah's pulse thundered in his ears. "Where are we even going?" "To someone who can end this," the man replied. "But first, we have to lose them." The car emerged from the alley onto a side street, weaving through a labyrinth of narrow roads. The pursuing vehicle reappeared moments later, barreling toward them. Elijah's chest tightened. It was like they were always one step behind. The man reached into his jacket and pulled out a sleek black handgun, handing it to Elijah. "Know how to use this?" Elijah stared at the weapon, his hands trembling. "Are you serious? I'm not—" "Do you want to live?" the man snapped, cutting him off. Elijah hesitated for only a moment before taking the gun. His fingers felt awkward and clumsy around it, but the weight of the weapon was oddly reassuring. He rolled down the window as the pursuing car drew closer. "Shoot the tires," the man instructed. "Don't think. Just aim and fire." Elijah leaned out of the window, the wind tearing at his face. His heart pounded as he aimed at the oncoming vehicle's tires. He squeezed the trigger. The recoil jolted him back into his seat, but the bullet found its mark. One of the car's front tires exploded, sending the vehicle skidding off the road and into a row of trash bins. The man grinned. "Not bad." Elijah slumped back into his seat, his chest heaving. "I can't believe I just did that." "Welcome to the real world," the man said. "But don't celebrate yet. They'll send more." The car sped through the city's outskirts, the urban landscape giving way to industrial ruins. The man finally slowed as they approached an abandoned factory, its towering smokestacks silhouetted against the pre-dawn sky. "This is it," he said, parking the car. "Inside is someone who can help us." Elijah's stomach churned. "How do you know we're not walking into a trap?" The man smirked. "I don't. But we're out of options." They stepped out of the car, the air heavy with the scent of rust and decay. The factory loomed above them, its broken windows like dark eyes watching their every move. The man led Elijah inside, the echo of their footsteps the only sound. In the center of the factory floor stood a single figure, cloaked in shadows. As they approached, the figure stepped into the light, a woman with piercing green eyes and a commanding presence. She looked at Elijah, then at the man. "You brought me a civilian?" she asked, her voice sharp. "He's not just a civilian," the man replied. "He has the video." The woman's gaze locked onto Elijah. "Show me." Elijah hesitated, then handed her the phone. She plugged it into a small device she pulled from her bag, the video playing silently on the screen. Her expression darkened as she watched. "This is bad," she muttered. "Worse than I thought." "You can expose them, right?" Elijah asked, his voice tinged with desperation. The woman shook her head. "It's not that simple. This syndicate isn't just a local operation. They have people in high places, politics, law enforcement, even the media. If we release this without a plan, they'll bury it, and us, before it sees the light of day." "Then what do we do?" Elijah asked. The woman glanced at the man, then back at Elijah. "We use it as leverage. This video is our ticket to negotiate with people who can bring the syndicate down from the inside, but it won't be easy." "It never is," the man said. The woman turned to Elijah. "If you go through with this, there's no turning back. They'll come after you harder than ever. Are you ready for that?" Elijah thought about the past 24 hours, the gas station, the cabin, the warehouse. He thought about the men in suits, the gang, the car chase. His life had already been turned upside down, but if this video could stop them, it had to be worth it. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady. The woman nodded. "Good, then let's get to work." As they began planning their next move, Elijah felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time since this nightmare began, he wasn't running. He was fighting back.